So today we're here to talk about the 5 time-tested keys to estimating that successful project managers can't live without. I first presented this presentation as a breakout session at the PMI Global Congress in 2008 in Denver, where it established the all-time highest ever pre-registration and turnout for a breakout session at a global Congress. In fact, almost 25% of the 4,500 attendees at Congress that year came to my breakout session. And so you get to hear not only what they heard, but the updated and revised and improved content. So let me begin with a question. How many of you have to deal with irrational stakeholders? I know many of you were thinking, is there any other kind? You see, I've presented that question to many PMI audiences over the years, and it's always that reaction. We so often feel like we're stuck dealing with so many irrational stakeholders, and yet I would propose that if we're doing our estimating and planning correctly, we don't have to deal with so many irrational stakeholders. In fact, perhaps the reason so many of them are irrational is because we're inducing that situation. We're perhaps causing them to be irrational. Let me ask another question. What is the core purpose of plan estimating? The question I've asked many PMI audiences, thousands of PMPs in the room, and I'm regularly shocked and amazed that most of them have never stopped to ponder this question. And so I put it to you, what is the core purpose of planning and estimating? And I think the research bears out that the core purpose of our primary activity as project managers, that primary focus on planning and estimating, the core purpose is so that we can aid and support decision makers. The reason, as the prior slide suggests, so many of them are irrational. We're not aiding and supporting their decision making with robust planning and reliable estimating. When we begin to do that, they begin to respect us, we have more influence, and we're able to aid and support their decision making. Under one other question, how many of you would agree that knowledge is power? Again, having shared this question with many PMI audiences, I know everybody in the room, their hands go up. Of course, knowledge is power. But even though that statement is true, it's incomplete. Because only power when it's shared or applied. And it's very important that it be shared and applied. Knowledge shared with our teams, with our customers, with our stakeholders creates influence so that we can get them to apply it to their decision making. And so hopefully you can see how these questions relate to one another, and they form a core way of thinking about how we must serve our stakeholders. We have to have that value that's so commonly popularly talked about today, servant leadership, where our effort, our focus is to support the decision makers, the stakeholders, the folks who have questions and concerns. The content we're going to cover today comes from our all-day class, master's course in estimating risk management, which we've taught with many hundreds of students and gotten their feedback. And so I just want to acknowledge that their feedback has helped us to refine and make the presentation better. Let's dive into the 5 time-tested keys of estimating. Focus, communication on the core purpose. We're there to aid and support decision makers. We're there to aid and support them in their decision making. And what has been proven now by the rise of the whole agile body of knowledge and the practitioners adopting it, it also must be adaptive. In the late 1800s, a field marshal said, "No plan survives contact with the enemy." And I have to tell you that statement is still true, but many times as project managers, we tend to misperceive and think that the enemy is somehow the stakeholders or the customer or management, when in fact, the enemy is complexity and uncertainty. And so none of our plans survive contact with the intense complexity and uncertainty that exists in project environments today. I would propose that if there isn't a lot of complexity and uncertainty, they probably don't need a project manager, and so you're never introduced to those kinds of situations. Here's another question for you to consider, and I'm going to tell you up front, The answer to this question is as obvious as it appears, yet you're going to find it confusing. The question is, when is the best time to do detailed estimating? Choice A, when you know very little, or choice B, when you know a lot? Well, obviously the answer is choice B. It's better to do detailed estimating when you know a lot. The reason you were feeling intense confusion is because you thought the question said, when are you most often asked to do detailed estimating? And that, of course, would be answer A, when you know very little. In fact, it's common practice in traditional, sometimes called waterfall project management, that we spend an intense amount of time and resources early on doing a lot of detailed estimating, and as a percentage of our total activity over time, we do less and less of it. And I would propose to you that that's a mistake. In fact, I'm certain it's a mistake, because when do we know very little? At the beginning. And when are we spending a lot of resources? At the beginning. Instead, one of the things that Agile does, and in fact this comes as a surprise to many PMPs, many traditional project managers, but in many ways Agile applies tools and concepts and principles from the PMBOK guide sometimes more effectively than we have done it in the past using our traditional approaches. And so in the Agile world, and I would suggest in the professional project manager's world, the one who wants to be a servant leader and aid and support their stakeholders, they recognize that there's a time horizon that is correlated to the effectivity of estimating. In the near-term horizon, you can, in fact, give definitive estimates, and you need to, in order to help the team organize its execution of the project. In the midterm, budgetary level estimates are capable, are possible, or can be reliable enough to aid and support decision-making on the midterm time horizon. And those budgetary estimates are extremely crucial to support what we like to call the organizational customer. You see, the organization has to provide resources for the team to, in fact, build solutions that the customers want. And in order to do that, they need those budgetary numbers. On the long-term horizon, it's possible to do ROM, rough order of magnitude estimates. And again, decision-making is occurring at the ROM level on the far time horizon. So we're providing adequate and appropriate support to decision-making. PMBOK guide, you'll find that it defines estimating as a quantitative assessment of likely amounts of project costs, and that those estimates of resources and effort and duration to complete the activity have an indication of accuracy. In other words, we accept that as you peer into the future, you do not have a crystal ball that can give you exact, precise estimate of what it's going to take. In fact, anybody with any experience in our field can tell you the only way to have a 100% reliable estimate, why that's to complete the work first and provide the estimate second. And of course, our organizations won't let us do that. So there has to be an indication of accuracy, an understanding of accuracy associated with how far into the future we're looking. If you look at the definition from the Association for the Advancement of Cost Engineering, and we're talking about folks who are very seriously hardcore focused on this whole idea of cost and engineering and estimating, and they even call it a predictive process, including risks and uncertainties, and used primarily for business decision-making. So they recognize and acknowledge in their definition that it's our job to aid and support our